The stones beneath Lyra's feet were slick with moss and morning dew as she climbed higher into the forbidden mountains, her lungs burning with each desperate breath. Behind her, the howls of the hunting party echoed through the valley, growing fainter but never disappearing entirely. They wanted her blood, wanted to see her hang for a crime she didn't commit. And there was nowhere left to run except into the place where even the bravest wolves feared to tread. The Shadow Peak Mountains had swallowed entire search parties over the years, and legends spoke of an ancient curse that turned the very air poisonous to those who ventured too deep. But poison seemed preferable to the rope waiting for her in the pack square. So Lyra pushed forward, ignoring the way her worn shoes slipped on the treacherous path, and the cold wind cut through her thin dress like claws. She had always been called unlucky, the Omega, who brought misfortune wherever she went. When the previous Alpha's mate had died in childbirth, Lyra had been the midwife's assistant, barely 16, and trembling as she handed over towels and boiled water. They blamed her anyway, whispered that her presence had cursed the delivery. When the winter harvests failed 2 years running, someone remembered that Lyra had walked through the fields on the autumn equinox, and suddenly it was her fault that the earth had turned barren. Every tragedy, every misfortune, every unexplained death found its way back to her, until she learned to make herself small and invisible, hoping that if she took up little enough space, perhaps they would forget she existed. But last night, during the lunar ceremony, Beta Garrick's daughter had collapsed and died right in front of the entire pack, her eyes rolling back as black veins spread across her skin like ink in water, and Lyra had been standing next to her, had even reached out to catch the girl as she fell. That was all the evidence they needed. Before you continue with this story, I want to invite you to hit that like button if you're already drawn into Lyra's desperate flight. And make sure you're subscribed because this tale of hidden kings and forbidden mountains is just getting started. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when she finally reaches the summit. The hunting party's howls had faded to nothing by the time Lyra collapsed against a boulder, her body shaking with exhaustion and cold. The air up here was thinner, harder to breathe, and there was something else too, a thickness to the atmosphere that felt almost alive, watching and waiting. The trees were different this high up, twisted and ancient, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers, frozen in a permanent scream. No birds sang in these woods, no insects hummed. The silence was so complete it felt like a physical presence pressing against her eardrums. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself and tried to stop her teeth from chattering as she scanned her surroundings, looking for any kind of shelter. Night would fall in a few hours, and she had no supplies, no warmth, nothing but the clothes on her back, and a growing certainty that she had simply traded one death for another. That's when she saw it, partially hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and overgrown thorn bushes. Stone walls, ancient and covered in moss, rising up from the mountainside like the bones of some long-dead giant. A structure that shouldn't exist this far into the high wilderness, too deliberate and massive to be natural. Lyra's wolf stirred uneasily inside her, whining softly, but desperation overrode caution. She pushed through the thorn bushes, ignoring the way they caught at her dress and skin, and found herself standing before a gatehouse that must have been magnificent once. The stones were carved with symbols she didn't recognize, flowing patterns that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them directly. The gate itself hung open, one massive door, hanging crookedly from broken hinges, revealing a courtyard beyond. Lyra stepped through, and the temperature changed immediately. The biting wind disappeared, replaced by air that was cool but no longer cruel, and the oppressive silence lifted just slightly, enough that she could hear her own breathing without it sounding like thunder. The courtyard was overgrown with plants that shouldn't grow at this altitude, flowering vines that cascaded down from upper windows and filled the air with a scent like honey and smoke. In the center stood a fountain, long dry, its basin filled with fallen leaves and the remnants of bird nests. Beyond it, a massive structure rose up, part fortress and part palace, with towers that disappeared into the low-hanging clouds. Everything about this place screamed of abandonment, of time passing without witness, but Lyra's wolf was growling now. a low rumble of warning that made her skin prickle with awareness. She wasn't alone here. The realization hit her. The same moment she heard the footstep behind her, boot against stone, deliberate and unhurried. Lyra spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, and found herself staring at a man who looked like he had stepped out of one of the old legends her grandmother used to tell. He was tall, taller than any wolf she had ever seen, with broad shoulders and a presence that filled the entire courtyard despite his stillness. His hair was dark and long, hanging past his shoulders in waves that looked like they hadn't seen scissors in years, and his face was all hard angles and sharp edges. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, but it was his eyes that froze her in place, pale gold and utterly inhuman, burning with an intensity that made her feel like he could see straight through her skin to the trembling core beneath. He wore clothes that might have been fine once, a shirt and trousers made from material too well crafted to be simple peasant wear, but they were worn now, faded and patched in places, hanging on his frame like he had forgotten what vanity meant. In his hand, he held a knife, not threatening exactly, but present, a reminder that he had been doing something before she interrupted. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, predator and prey frozen in the eternal dance, and Lyra's mind raced through possibilities and explanations, none of which made sense. No one lived in the Shadow Peak Mountains. No one could survive up here. And yet here, he was, this wild man with ancient eyes, looking at her like she was the impossible thing. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough from disuse, each word shaped carefully as if he had to remember how language worked. You shouldn't be here. Not a threat, just a statement of fact, delivered in a tone that suggested he was as surprised by her presence as she was by his. These mountains don't give back what they take. How did you get past the wards? Lyra found her voice, though it came out, smaller than she intended. I didn't know there were wards. I was just running and I found the gate open. She watched his expression shift, something flickering across his features that might have been confusion or concern. I'm sorry for trespassing. I'll leave if you want. I just needed somewhere to hide for the night. Somewhere they wouldn't follow. They? His eyes narrowed, and she noticed how still he held himself, every muscle controlled and contained. Like movement was something he had to consciously remember to do. Who is hunting you? My pack. The words felt like admitting defeat, but there was no point in lying. They think I killed someone. I didn't. But they don't care about truth when they have a convenient scapegoat. She watched him process this, saw something that looked almost like recognition flash through his eyes. I know you probably don't want company, especially from someone who brings bad luck wherever she goes. But if you could just let me stay until morning, I'll be gone before dawn. I won't bother you or touch anything or even speak if you don't want me to. He was quiet for so long, she thought he might refuse, might simply turn around and leave her standing in the courtyard to freeze. But then he did something unexpected. He laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no humor at all. Bad luck. Is that what they call it in the packs now? He slid the knife into his belt and turned back toward the main building, gesturing for her to follow, with a movement that suggested he wasn't used to having to communicate with others. Come. Night falls quickly in these mountains, and the cold will kill you faster than any curse. You can stay, but touch nothing, ask nothing, and if you value your life, don't go into the East Wing. If you're loving the mystery of this mountain fortress and its strange inhabitant, leave a comment telling me what you think Kira is going to discover about this man, because the secrets hidden in these ancient walls run deeper than anyone could imagine. Lyra followed him through corridors that seemed to go on forever, past rooms filled with furniture covered in dust cloths and windows that looked out over impossible views of the valleys below. The fortress was enormous, large enough to house hundreds. But everywhere she looked, she saw signs of solitary occupation. A single chair pulled up to a massive dining table, one place setting in a kitchen designed for a staff of dozens, a path worn into the stone floors from endless pacing. He led her to a room on the 3rd floor, small by the standards of this place, but larger than anywhere she had ever slept, with a bed that looked softer than clouds and a fireplace already laid with wood and kindling. "There should be clothes in the wardrobe that will fit you better than what you're wearing," he said, not looking at her directly, as if eye contact cost him something. "The bathroom is through there. Water still runs, though it takes a moment to. Heat. Don't leave this room after dark." He turned to go, then paused in the doorway, his back still to her. "What's your name?" "Lyra." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how bedraggled she must look, covered in scratches and dirt, her dress torn and her hair wild. "What's yours?" For a moment she didn't think he would answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Kale," and then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded far too final. Lyra stood in the center of the room, her mind spinning with questions and confusion. Kyle. The name felt familiar somehow, like something she should recognize but couldn't quite place. She moved to the wardrobe and found it full of women's clothing, all of it decades out of style but well preserved. Beautiful dresses and practical traveling clothes and soft nightgowns made from materials she'd only ever seen on the Pax nobility. Who had these belonged to? Where was that person now? And why was Kale living alone in this massive fortress, looking at her with eyes that held centuries of pain? She cleaned herself up in the bathroom, which had running water just as he promised, hot and plentiful, and changed into a simple dress of deep green wool that fit her surprisingly well. By the time she finished, darkness had fallen outside, complete and absolute, and when she looked out the window, she couldn't see anything at all, not even the outline of the mountains against the sky. It was like the fortress existed in a void, cut off from the rest of the world. She lit the fire, which caught immediately despite her inexperience with such things, and settled onto the bed, intending to just rest for a moment before figuring out what to do next. But exhaustion claimed her almost instantly, dragging her down into sleep so deep she didn't even dream. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of food. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was, expected to see the familiar walls of her tiny room in the pack house. But then memory returned with the weight of stones. She sat up and found a tray on the small table beside the bed, laden with bread and cheese and fruit, along with a pot of tea that was still steaming. Kyle must have brought it while she slept, moving through the room without waking her, and the thought made her shiver for reasons she couldn't quite name. She ate quickly, suddenly ravenous, and then ventured out of the room to explore. The fortress was even more impressive in daylight, with high ceilings covered in faded murals and windows that turned the morning sun into patterns of colored light across the floors. She found Kale in what must have once been a library, surrounded by books that looked older than memory, carefully repairing the spine of a massive tome with materials spread across a work table. He looked up when she entered, and for just a moment, she saw surprise flash across his features, as if he had genuinely forgotten she was there. "Thank you for the breakfast," she said, staying near the doorway, giving him space, "and for letting me stay. I meant what I said about leaving this morning, but I wanted to thank you first." Cal set down his tools with movements that were too precise, too controlled, like he had to think about each action. "Where will you go?" Not an invitation to stay, just a question. But Lyra heard the curiosity beneath it. "I don't know." The honesty felt dangerous, but lies seemed pointless here. "Away, I suppose. Far enough that no one from my pack will find me. Maybe to one of the human cities where they don't care about pack law or curses." She watched him work for a moment, noticed the way his hands moved with practiced ease over the delicate pages. "You love books. Books don't change." His voice was soft, almost meditative. "I can leave one for a decade and return to find the same words on the same pages. There's comfort in that." He glanced at her, and she caught something in his expression that looked like loneliness so profound it had become part of his bones. The world changes. People change and die and forget. But books remember. Lyra took a step into the room, drawn by the sadness in his words. "How long have you been here alone?" "Too long." He returned his attention to the book, effectively ending the conversation. But Lyra felt like she had glimpsed something important, a crack in whatever armor he wore against the world. She spent the day exploring the fortress, always careful to avoid the east wing as he had instructed, and everywhere she went she found evidence of time passing without purpose. Rooms that had once been full of life now stood empty and silent. Gardens that had been carefully tended now grew wild and chaotic. And throughout it all, signs of Cale's solitary existence, his attempts to maintain this massive place alone, to preserve something that the world had forgotten. She found him again in the evening, in a courtyard garden where vegetables grew in neat rows, and without asking, she knelt down and began pulling weeds, working alongside him in silence until the sun set and the air grew cold. This became their pattern. Days passed, then a week, and Lyra kept expecting Cale to tell her to leave. But he never did. They worked together in comfortable silence, repairing walls and tending gardens and slowly, carefully, beginning to talk. He never asked about her past, and she never asked about his, an unspoken agreement that some wounds were too deep to probe. But in the small things, in the passing of tools and the sharing of meals, something began to grow between them. Fragile and tentative as the first shoots of spring. Drop alike if you're as invested in this slow-burning connection as I am, because the bond forming between these two broken souls is about to face its first real test, and what Lyra discovers about Cale's true identity will change everything. It was during her third week in the fortress that Lyra found the portrait. She had been exploring the upper floors, rooms she hadn't yet visited, and stumbled into what must have been a grand gallery once. The walls were covered in paintings, generations of faces staring down at her with expressions that ranged from stern to gentle, all of them sharing certain features. The same strong jaw, the same intense eyes, the same bearing of absolute authority. At the end of the gallery hung the largest portrait, and Lyra's breath caught in her throat when she recognized the face. Kyle, but not as she knew him. This Kyle wore clothing of obvious wealth and power, rich fabrics and a crown that seemed to be made of twisted silver branches. He stood with one hand resting on the back of an ornate throne, his expression regal and distant, every inch the ruler he had clearly been. And beneath the portrait, engraved on a golden plaque, were words that made her heart stop completely. Kyle Ashenfar, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, Uniter of the Pax, Lord of the Shadow Peak. May his reign be eternal. Alpha King. The Alpha King, the legendary ruler who had united all the Northern Pax 3 centuries ago, who had been said to possess power beyond any wolf in living memory, who had disappeared without explanation 30 years ago and left the territories to descend into chaos and fragmentation. The figure from stories and legends, and he was here, living alone in this fortress, repairing books, and growing vegetables like any ordinary wolf. Lyra stumbled backward, her mind reeling, and the sound must have carried because suddenly Kyle was there, appearing in the doorway with that unnatural speed that she had noticed but never questioned. He took in the portrait, her expression, and something in his face closed off, became blank and unreachable. Now you know. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. I wondered when you would find this room. I should have locked it. You're him. Lyra's, voice came out as barely a whisper. You're the Alpha King. The one everyone says is dead. The one the Pax have been searching for since before I was born. She looked between him and the portrait, trying to reconcile the powerful figure in the painting with the quiet, lonely man she had come to know. Why? Why did you disappear? Why are you hiding here? Kyle was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, the words sounded like they were being pulled from somewhere deep and painful. Because I failed. He walked to the portrait, staring up at the image of who he had been. 30 years ago, something happened. A curse. Dark magic from sources I never fully understood. It swept through the fortress in a single night and killed everyone. My mate, my children, my entire court. Hundreds of souls, gone before dawn. And I survived. He laughed, bitter and broken. Not just survived. I was changed, made immortal, unable to die, unable to even feel the bond to my pack anymore. Became something other, neither living nor dead, trapped in between. Lyra felt tears pricking her eyes as she listened, understanding beginning to dawn. That's why you've been here alone. You couldn't go back. How could I? He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of the anguish he carried. I was supposed to protect them. I was the Alpha King, the strongest of all wolves, and I couldn't save a single one of them, and the curse made sure I would remember. Made sure I would live forever with that failure. So I stayed here, in the place where they died, because leaving felt like abandoning them a second time. He shook his head slowly. The packs are better off without me. They think I'm dead, and that's what I should be. What I would be, if this curse would only let me go. She crossed the distance between them without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't fully understand. You can't actually believe that. You can't think the world is better off without you, when you're the one who united the packs in the first place, who ended the territory wars and created the treaty system. She reached out and took his hand, feeling how cold his skin was, how tightly he held himself under control. What happened wasn't your fault. You were attacked by magic you couldn't have prepared for. That's not failure. That's tragedy. Kale looked down at where their hands joined, and something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like wonder. I haven't been able to feel the pack bond since that night. Haven't felt anything through the connection that makes us wolves instead of just beasts. But when you touch me, I feel something. Faint, like an echo from very far away, but present. He raised his free hand slowly, carefully, and touched her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Who are you, Lyra? What are you? Before she could answer, pain exploded through her chest, sharp and sudden, like claws raking across her heart. Lyra gasped and doubled over, and Kale caught her, lowering her carefully to the floor as the pain intensified. Through the haze of agony, she felt something stirring inside her, something that had been sleeping her entire life, bound and contained and hidden. And now it was waking up, tearing through the bonds like they were made of paper. Kale was speaking urgently, asking what was wrong, but she couldn't answer, couldn't form words through the transformation happening inside her. Her wolf surged forward with a power she had never felt before, and suddenly she could sense things she had never been able to sense. Pack bonds stretching out in every direction like threads of light, the territorial boundaries of every pack within hundreds of miles, and beneath it all, a darkness, a wrongness that infected everything like poison in the water. When the pain finally receded, Lyra found herself lying with her head in Kale's lap, his hand, stroking her hair with careful concern, and she knew immediately that something fundamental had changed. She could feel her wolf differently now, not as a separate entity, but as an integrated part of herself, powerful and clear and undeniably alpha. The binding broke, she whispered, pieces clicking into place in her mind. Someone put a binding on me when I was young, suppressed my true nature so I would present as Omega instead of Alpha. She sat up carefully, meeting Kale's eyes. That's why. They blame me for everything. They needed me to be powerless, needed everyone to see me as cursed and unlucky, because if I ever discovered what I really was, their whole scheme would fall apart. Comment below if you've figured out where this conspiracy is heading, because Lyra and Kale are about to uncover something that connects their fates in ways neither of them imagined. Kale's expression had gone hard, dangerous in a way she hadn't seen before. Who would have the power to bind in it? Alpha's nature? And more importantly, why? He helped her to her feet, and she could feel the change in him too, the way he was looking at her now with recognition. Alpha to alpha, equal to equal. Tell me everything about your pack. Every detail, even if it seems insignificant. So Lyra did. She told him about growing up in the Silvercrest pack, about being marked as unlucky from her earliest memories, about the series of tragedies and misfortunes that always seemed to happen when she was nearby. She told him about the accusations, the whispers, the way certain members of the pack leadership always seemed to be watching her with expressions that were calculating rather than cruel. And as she spoke, she saw Kale's face grow darker, his hands clenching into fists. It's the same pattern. His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. The same pattern as what happened here 30 years ago. Small incidents, escalating tragedies, always with a convenient scapegoat to blame. We had a wolf. An elder named Maris, who everyone said was cursed. Crops would fail near her home. Animals would sicken. Children would grow ill after she touched them. He began to pace, energy returning to his movements after decades of stillness. We should have investigated properly, should have looked deeper, but it was easier to believe in curses than conspiracy. And then the night of the attack came, and Maris was found dead in her room with symbols carved into her flesh, ritualistic marks, that suggested she had been the focus of something dark. But by then it was too late. The curse had already been released. Lyra felt ice spreading through her veins. You think someone used me the same way, set me up as a ritual focus, suppressed my alpha nature so I couldn't defend myself, and has been building toward something for years. She thought back to the lunar ceremony, to the way Beta Garrick's daughter had died with black veins spreading across her skin. The girl who died, everyone, said I poisoned her. But what if it was the same as Maris? What if she was killed to complete some kind of ritual? Then your pack is in danger. Kale moved with sudden purpose, heading toward the door. And if the pattern holds, whatever they're planning will happen soon, during a moment of significance. Another ceremony, perhaps, or a gathering when the entire pack is present. He paused and looked back at her. You need to learn to control your alpha power quickly. The binding suppressed it, for so long that releasing it all at once could overwhelm you. But if we're going back to your pack to stop this, you'll need every bit of strength you can summon. We? Lyra followed him, hope and fear warring in her chest. You're coming with me? But you said you couldn't return to the world. Kale stopped in the corridor, his back to her, and when he spoke, his voice carried weight of decision that felt momentous. I've been hiding for 30 years, telling myself it was what I deserved, that the world was better off without me. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the reason the curse kept me alive was not to punish me, but to prepare me for this moment, to give me the knowledge and experience to stop this from happening to another pack. He turned to face her, and the Alpha King from the portrait looked back at her from his eyes. Besides, you woke something in me that I thought was long dead. The ability to feel, to care, to want to protect. I'm not letting you face this alone. The next days were intense, focused entirely on helping Lyra understand and control her alpha abilities. Kale proved to be a patient but demanding teacher, pushing her to sense the pack bonds, to project her will, to command with the authority that was her birthright. He taught her to read the territorial boundaries, to feel the flow of power through the pack structure, and to recognize the signs of dark magic corrupting the natural order. And as they trained, they talked, really talked, for the first time, sharing their pasts and their pain, their failures and their fears. Lyra told him about the loneliness of being the outcast, about watching everyone else find their place, while she remained forever on the outside. Kale spoke of the weight of leadership, of making decisions that affected thousands, and living with the consequences when those decisions went wrong, of loving deeply, and losing everything in a single night of horror. And through it all, the connection between them grew, stronger, more undeniable. Lyra found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the way his hair fell across his face when he concentrated, the rare moments when his expression softened into something almost like peace. She learned that he hummed old songs when he worked, tunes from centuries past that no one else remembered. She discovered that he had a dry sense of humor, buried under layers of grief, that he was gentle with growing things, that he flinched from his own reflection, as if the sight of himself caused pain, and Kale, for his part, seemed to come alive in her presence. The hollowness that had defined him began to fill with something like hope. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, moved with energy instead of the careful deliberation of someone who had forgotten why movement mattered. He started talking about the future instead of just the past, making plans that extended beyond the next day or week, as if he was finally allowing himself to believe that tomorrow might be worth seeing. If this growing bond between broken souls has you feeling all the emotions, make sure you're subscribed because we're about to head back to Silvercrest Pack. And the confrontation waiting there will test everything Lyra and Kale have become to each other. On the 7th day after her transformation, Lyra woke to find Kale standing at her window, watching the sunrise with an expression of determination. "It's time," he said without preamble. "The autumn equinox is in 3 days. If they're following the same ritual pattern as the curse that struck here, they'll act during the ceremony. We need to leave today if we're going to reach your pack in time." They prepared quickly, gathering supplies and weapons from the fortress's armory. Ancient blades that had been crafted for Kale's royal guard and still held edges sharp enough to cut shadow. Kale moved through the halls with purpose, and Lyra realized he was saying goodbye to this place, to the prison he had made for himself. In the library, he placed his hand on the repaired books. In the garden, he knelt and touched the earth. In the portrait gallery, he stood before the image of his family for a long time, his expression unreadable, before finally turning away. "Will you come back?" Lyra asked as they stood in the courtyard, ready to leave. Kale looked back at the fortress, at the towers disappearing into the clouds. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe it's time to let it become what it wants to be. A memory and a monument, a place where the past can rest." He held out his hand to her. "But wherever I go next, I'd like you there, if you'll have me." Lyra took his hand, feeling the rightness of it, the way their powers resonated together like notes of a chord. "Then let's go save my pack, and figure out the rest later." The journey down the mountain took 2 days of hard travel, but it felt like crossing between worlds. With each step away from the fortress, Lyra could feel Kale's tension increasing, his awareness expanding as the self-imposed isolation fell away. He started sensing things again. Pack territories and power struggles, the complex web of alliances and conflicts that defined the current state of the northern packs. And what he sensed clearly troubled him, made his jaw tighten and his eyes go hard. "It's worse than I thought," he said as they made camp on the 2nd night, still a day's journey from Silvercrest. "The packs have fragmented badly without central authority. Territory disputes everywhere. The treaty system has almost completely broken down. And underneath it all, I can feel the same wrongness that infected my fortress before the curse struck. It's not just your pack, Lyra. This conspiracy is spread across multiple territories." Lyra fed another branch to their fire, watching the flames dance. "How do we fight something that large? Even if we stop what's happening in Silvercrest, there will be others. More rituals, more scapegoats, more attacks. We do what I should have done 30 years ago." Kale's voice was firm, resolved. "We trace it to the source. Someone is coordinating this, supplying the dark magic and selecting the targets. Find them, stop them, and the rest of the conspiracy collapses." He looked at her across the fire, and in his eyes, she saw not just determination but something deeper, something that made her heart race. "But first, we save your pack, because they're yours, Lyra. You're their true alpha, even if they don't know it yet. And an alpha protects their own, no matter the cost." They reached the outskirts of Silvercrest territory as the sun set on the day before the equinox. Lyra could feel the pack bonds from here, all the wolves she had grown up with, and now she could sense what she had never been able to before, the fear running through the pack like an infection, the way certain wolves held themselves separate from the rest, creating fractures and divisions, and at the center of it all, a dark nexus of power that pulsed with malevolent intent, focused on the ceremonial grounds where tomorrow's ritual would take place. "They've already begun the preparations," Kale said quietly, crouched beside her on the ridge overlooking the pack village. "See there, the way the shadows don't quite fall naturally? Those are containment wards, meant to trap power once it's released. And there, near the Alpha's house, that wolf who walks alone, he's carrying ritual tools hidden under his coat. This is more coordinated than what happened to me. They've learned, refined their methods." Lyra studied the wolf Kale had indicated, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. "That's Morgan. He's the pack's spiritual advisor. came to us about 5 years ago from the Western Territories. Everyone trusted him because he helped end a sickness that was spreading through the children. She turned to Cale, understanding dawning. He brought the sickness, didn't he? Then cured it to gain influence. Most likely. Cale's expression was grim. It's a common infiltration technique. Create a problem, solve it, become indispensable. Then slowly poison everything from within until you're ready to strike. He started backing away from the ridge. We need to find somewhere to plan. Going in blindly will get us killed. And if we die, no one will stop what's coming. They found shelter in a cave system Lyra remembered from her childhood, hidden tunnels where she used to escape when the pack's cruelty became too much. There, by the light of a small fire, they planned their approach. The equinox ceremony would begin at moonrise, with the entire pack gathered in the ceremonial grounds. Morgan would certainly attempt to complete whatever ritual he had been building toward, likely using another scapegoat the way he had used Lyra. Their best chance was to disrupt the ritual before it could reach completion, expose Morgan's true nature, and break the wards he had established. But we also need to break the belief, Lyra said, thinking it through. Even if we stop the ritual, if the pack still believes in the curse, in the idea that some wolves are unlucky, the fear remains. Morgan or someone like him can just come back and start over. She looked at Kyle. We need to show them what really happened. Make them understand how they've been manipulated. Kyle nodded slowly. Then we'll need to capture Morgan alive and force a confession, which means I'll have to reveal who I am. Use my authority as Alpha King to compel truth. He met her eyes. Are you ready for that? Once I do this, everything changes. The packs will know I'm alive. They'll have expectations, demands. The isolation I've lived in for 30 years will be over permanently. Lyra reached out and took his hand, squeezing gently. You've been ready to step back into the world since the moment you decided to help me. You just needed a reason to believe it was worth it. She smiled, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Besides, you won't be alone this time. You'll have me, for whatever that's worth. It's worth everything. Kyle pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. You woke me up, Lyra. Made me remember what it means to live instead of just exist. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that. And then he was kissing her, gentle and fierce all at once, and Lyra felt something slot into place inside her chest, a recognition that went soul deep, beyond words or logic or reason. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cale rested his forehead against hers. Is it too soon to say that you're my mate? That I've felt the bond growing stronger every day since you walked into my fortress? Because the curse took my ability to feel the mate connection, but it's back now. Clear and undeniable. And it's all pointing to you. Lyra laughed, the sound watery with tears she didn't bother to hide. It's probably too soon by any reasonable standard. We've known each other less than a month, but I feel it too. Have felt it almost from the beginning. Like I was incomplete before and didn't even know it. She kissed him again, softer this time. So yes, you can say it. You can say you're my mate and I'm yours. And we can figure out what that means after we save my pack from dark magic and conspiracy. They spent the night in each other's arms, not sleeping, just talking and holding each other and preparing mentally for what dawn would bring. Kyle told her about his mate who had died in the curse, about the guilt he carried for not being able to save her, and Lyra helped him understand that loving again wasn't betraying that memory. Lyra spoke about her fear that she would fail, that her newly discovered alpha power wouldn't be enough, and Kyle reminded her of all the strength she had already shown just by surviving in a pack that wanted her broken. Let me know in the comments if you're ready for the confrontation that's about to happen, because Lyra and Cale are about to face down a conspiracy that's been decades in the making, and not everyone will make it out alive. The equinox ceremony began exactly as tradition demanded, with the pack gathering in the ceremonial grounds as the sun touched the horizon. Lyra and Cale watched from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, both of them cloaked and hooded to hide their identities. Lyra could see her former packmates, wolves she had grown up, with, looking tense and afraid. The deaths and disasters of recent months had taken their toll, leaving everyone jumpy and suspicious. Alpha Marcus stood at the center, looking older than Lyra remembered, worn down by the weight of leadership in troubled times. And beside him, serene and confident, stood Morgan, the spiritual advisor, dressed in ceremonial robes and carrying a staff that practically hummed with dark power. "He's not even hiding it," Cale murmured, his voice tight with anger. "That staff is a ritual focus, probably containing the stored power from all the accidents and deaths he's engineered over the years. And see how he's positioned himself? He's not standing with the pack. He's standing apart, like a conductor preparing to direct an orchestra." Lyra watched as Morgan began the ceremony, his voice carrying across the clearing with unnatural clarity. He spoke of the pack's troubles, of the curse that plagued them, of the need for purification and sacrifice. And then, with theatrical timing, he pointed toward the crowd and called out a name. "Bring forth Ilara." A young Omega was dragged forward, struggling and crying, and Lyra felt rage burn through her. She knew Ilara, a kind girl barely 18, who had never harmed anyone. But Morgan was declaring her the source of the curse, claiming that his divinations had revealed her true nature as a vessel for dark spirits. The pack was murmuring, uncertain, but Alpha Marcus looked convinced, desperate enough to believe anything that promised an end to their suffering. "That's our cue," Cale said, already moving. "Stay close and follow my lead." They stepped out of the shadows together, and Lyra let her hood fall back, revealing herself to her former pack. The gasps and shouts started immediately, wolves pointing and backing away, and she heard her name repeated like a curse. But she kept walking, head high, alpha power radiating from her in waves that made the pack bonds thrum with recognition. Beside her, Cale moved with the absolute confidence of someone who had commanded thousands, and when he let his own power flare, wolves dropped to their knees involuntarily, responding to an authority deeper than conscious thought. "Lyra?" Alpha Marcus's voice cracked with shock. "You're alive? But how? And who is that with you?" It was Morgan who answered, his face twisting with rage as recognition hit him. "That's impossible. You're dead. The curse killed you 30 years ago. I saw the reports, verified them myself." He took a step back, his staff glowing with gathering power. "You're a ghost, a trick of the darkness. I won't let you interfere." Kyle pushed back his own hood, and even in the fading light, his face was unmistakable to those who knew the old stories. "I am Cale Ashenfar, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And I am very much alive, Morgan, despite your organization's best efforts to ensure otherwise." His voice carried alpha command strong enough to make wolves whimper. "You will release that girl and surrender yourself for judgment. Your conspiracy ends tonight." But Morgan laughed, wild and unhinged. "You're too late, old king. The ritual is already in motion. I just needed one more sacrifice to complete it, and you've delivered yourselves perfectly." He slammed his staff into the ground, and the wards he had spent years establishing flared to life, creating a dome of dark energy over the ceremonial grounds. Lyra felt the trap snap shut, cutting them off from escape. "You've been deceived for decades," Morgan shouted to the pack, his composure cracking to reveal the fanatic beneath. The Alpha King was just the first domino. His fall created the chaos we needed, the fracturing of pack unity. And from that chaos, we've been building something new, a structure of power that serves true masters, not outdated notions of pack and territory. He gestured wildly. Every misfortune, every tragedy, every death has fed the ritual. And tonight, with the blood of an Alpha King and a true Alpha, we complete the transformation. Your pack will become the first of many, wolves bound not by choice, but by magic that cannot be broken. Alpha Marcus looked devastated, understanding hitting him. "You were behind it all. The sicknesses, the failed hunts, the deaths. You made us believe we were cursed when you were the curse." "I was the solution," Morgan screamed. "I was preparing you for a better world. But you're too blind to see it." He raised his staff high, and power exploded outward, dark tendrils reaching for Lyra and Kyle. But Lyra was ready. She had been practicing with Kyle, learning to manipulate pack bonds, and now she reached out and grabbed hold of every wolf in the clearing, channeling her alpha authority through connections that had been suppressed her entire life. "Fight it," she commanded, her voice ringing with power. "He has no true authority over you. Remember who you are. Remember what it means to be pack." The bonds flared bright, responding to her call, and wolves began to shake off Morgan's influence. But the wards were still active, still trapping them, and Morgan's ritual was reaching critical mass, power building toward an explosion that would reshape everyone caught within it. Kale was moving, engaging Morgan directly, their powers clashing in bursts of light and shadow. But even an Alpha King was struggling against magic that had been gathering strength for 30 years. Lyra made a choice. She reached deeper into the pack bonds, all the way down to the foundation of what made them wolves, and she grabbed hold of the darkness Morgan had woven through them. His ritual had been feeding on the pack's fear and pain, using their own energy against them, but that meant the pack's energy was also the key to unraveling it. With a mental wrench that made her scream with effort, Lyra reversed the flow, pulling the stolen power back through the bonds and into herself, making herself the conduit instead of Alara, instead of any of them. The pain was indescribable, like swallowing poison and fire, and every nightmare she had ever had. Morgan's corruption burned through her, trying to consume her from within. But Lyra held on, refusing to let go, refusing to let him win. She could feel Kale's alarm through their mate bond, heard him shouting her name, but she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. Through the pain, she found the ritual's core, the dark nexus that Morgan had been building toward for years, and she recognized it, saw the same pattern that had cursed Kale's fortress, that had killed his family and left him immortal and broken. Someone had taught Morgan this magic, given him the tools and knowledge to recreate it. This wasn't just one fanatic's crusade, it was part of something larger, an organization that had been targeting alphas and packs for centuries. But that was a problem for later. Right now, Lyra had to break this ritual or die trying. She gathered all her alpha power, all her newfound strength, and channeled it into a single focused strike at the ritual's heart. The magic resisted, fought back, but she was stronger than Morgan had anticipated, fueled by love and rage and the desperate need to protect her pack. With a final surge of will, she shattered the dark nexus, and the ritual exploded. The backlash hit her like a physical blow, throwing her backward. She felt Kale catch her, his arms wrapping around her as they both went down. The wards collapsed, the dark energy dissipating into nothing. And Morgan screamed as his staff cracked and shattered, the stored power he had gathered for years evaporating in an instant. He fell to his knees, suddenly just a man without his magic, looking lost and broken. Lyra lay in Kale's arms, her body shaking with exhaustion, but alive. Incredibly, impossibly alive. She had expected the ritual's destruction to kill her, had been prepared for it, but somehow she had survived. Holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair, and she could feel his tears on her skin. "Don't ever do that again," he whispered fiercely. "Don't ever make me think I'm going to lose you. I just got you. I can't lose you already." "Noted," Lyra managed, her voice hoarse. "Next time I'll let you be the heroic sacrifice." Around them the pack was slowly recovering, wolves helping each other to their feet, and staring at Morgan with expressions of betrayal and rage. Alpha Marcus approached him, his face carved from stone. "Why? Why did you do this to us?" Morgan looked up, and for a moment, something like sanity returned to his eyes. "Because we were promised a world without chaos. The organization showed us the path. A way to bind wolves into perfect order, perfect obedience. No more territory wars, no more pack feuds, just peace enforced by magic that cannot be questioned." He laughed bitterly. "But I failed. The ritual was supposed to be unstoppable once, initiated. She shouldn't have been able to break it. Who is we? Kale demanded, standing and pulling Lyra up with him. Who taught you this magic? Who is the organization? But Morgan just smiled, a terrible expression that made Lyra's blood run cold. I'm just one thread in a much larger tapestry, old king. You stopped me, but there are others, dozens of others, all working toward the same goal. The era of pack sovereignty is ending. A new order is coming, and before anyone could stop him, he bit down on something in his mouth, probably a poison capsule hidden in a false tooth. He convulsed once and went still, dead before anyone could react. Hit that subscribe button if you're desperate to know what Lyra and Kale will do now that they've discovered this conspiracy goes deeper than anyone imagined, because the fight for their pack's freedom is just beginning. In the aftermath, there was chaos of a different kind. Wolves were crying, embracing, trying to process what they had just learned. Alpha Marcus approached Lyra with hesitant steps, his expression complicated. You're a true alpha. All these years we thought you were Omega, thought you were cursed, and you were actually suppressed. Shame crossed his face. I'm sorry for everything we did to you, everything we believed. You saved us, and we never deserved your protection. Lyra looked at him, at all of them, and felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger at what they had put her through, relief that they were safe, sadness for all the wasted years. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I couldn't let you die. Couldn't let Morgan win. Because despite everything, you're still my pack. That bond doesn't break just because people were cruel. She glanced at Kale, drawing strength from his presence. But I'm not staying. I have a mate now, and we have work to do. This conspiracy Morgan spoke of, it's real, and it's not going to stop just because we disrupted one. Ritual. Alpha Marcus nodded slowly. I understand. But please, before you go, know that you will always have a place here. We were wrong about you, and if you ever want to return, you'll be welcomed as the alpha you truly are. Lyra didn't answer, just turned and walked away. Kale beside her. They left the packlands as the moon rose fully, heading back toward the mountains, but with a new purpose now. As they walked, Kale spoke quietly. We need to find the others Morgan mentioned. Stop them, before they can complete their own rituals. I know. Lyra leaned against him, tired but determined. And we need to warn the other packs. Help them identify infiltrators before it's too late. This is bigger than just your fortress or my pack. This is someone trying to reshape wolf society entirely. Then we'll stop them. Kale's voice was firm, the Alpha King returning to his purpose. I've been in hiding for 30 years, letting the world fracture without me. That ends now. I'm going to reclaim my position, reunite the northern packs, and root out this conspiracy wherever it's hidden. He stopped and turned to face her. But I'm not doing it alone. I want you beside me, as my mate, as my partner, as my equal. Will you help me rebuild what was broken? Lyra looked up at this man, who had been a myth, a legend, a ghost, and was now just Kale, her mate, her love, broken and healing and impossibly brave. Yes, but we do it differently than before. Not a single ruler on a throne, but a council. True alpha voices from every pack, working together. And we make sure Omegas have representation, that the hierarchy doesn't become a weapon again. She smiled. If we're going to change the world, let's actually change it. Kale pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings. Then let's get started. We have a conspiracy to destroy and a world to rebuild. They spent the next months traveling through the northern territories, appearing at pack gatherings and establishing Kale's return. The reactions varied wildly. Some packs celebrated, seeing the Alpha King as a savior returned. Others were suspicious, demanding proof and questioning his decades of absence. But everywhere they went, Lyra stood beside him, not as a follower, but as a partner, and her presence changed the conversations. She spoke of the manipulation she had endured, the suppression of her true nature, and how systemic change was needed to prevent such abuses. Slowly, grudgingly, packs began to listen. They also hunted for signs of the conspiracy. With Morgan dead, they had to work from fragments, but patterns emerged. Other packs had spiritual advisors who appeared suddenly and gained influence quickly. Other wolves had been marked as cursed or unlucky. Other territories showed signs of ritual preparation. Lyra and Kale moved to intercept each one, disrupting rituals, exposing infiltrators, and slowly dismantling the network Morgan had been part of. It wasn't easy. They faced resistance from wolves who benefited from the old hierarchies, who saw Kale's proposed changes as threatening their power. They confronted dark magic users who were more skilled than Morgan had been, battles that left them both wounded and exhausted. And they discovered that the conspiracy's leadership remained hidden, operating from shadows, always one step ahead. But they also found allies, other alphas who had been questioning the system, omegas who had been fighting for change from within, healers and scholars who recognized the signs of magical corruption and wanted to help. A movement began to build, not just of stopping the conspiracy, but of genuinely transforming wolf society into something more just, more equal, more sustainable. And through it all, the bond between Lyra and Kale deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Lyra could read Kale's moods in the set of his shoulders, how Kale could sense when Lyra needed space versus when she needed comfort. They argued, sometimes fierce debates about strategy and philosophy, but they always came back together, stronger for having been challenged. They made love under open stars and in secure dens, learning each other's bodies with the same intensity they learned each other's souls. And they talked about the future, about what they would build together when the immediate crisis passed. 1 year after leaving Silvercrest, they called a great gathering, inviting representatives from every pack in the northern territories, not just alphas, but omegas and betas too, a true cross-section of their society. In a natural amphitheater in the mountains, with hundreds of wolves watching, Kale formally proposed the new structure they had been building toward, a council system where each pack sent multiple representatives, where power was distributed rather than concentrated, where checks and balances prevented any one wolf from having absolute authority. The old way failed, Kyle said, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. My way failed, where one king tried to hold everything together through force of will. We need something more resilient, more responsive to the needs of all wolves, not just those at the top of the hierarchy. He reached out and took Lyra's hand, drawing her forward. My mate taught me that strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. That true leadership means listening more than commanding, that the measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable members, not how it elevates its most powerful. Lyra spoke then, her voice steady despite her nerves. I was marked as cursed, suppressed, and dismissed because I threatened a system that relied on keeping some wolves powerless. But I survived. And I discovered my strength, and now I'm standing here telling you that we can build something better. A society where no wolf has to live in fear of being scapegoated, where power is earned through service rather than inherited, through birth, where every voice has value. She looked out at the crowd, meeting eyes Omega and Alpha alike. The conspiracy we've been fighting wants to bind us into forced obedience. I'm proposing we bind ourselves into chosen community. It's messier, harder, requires constant work, but it's worth it. We're worth it. The debate that followed lasted 3 days. Wolves argued passionately for and against the proposals, raised concerns and suggested modifications, negotiated and compromised, and, slowly, painfully, built consensus. And in the end, by a clear majority, they voted to adopt the new structure. The council system was established, with the first representatives elected immediately. Kyle took a seat on the council, but as one voice among many, not as absolute ruler. And beside him, Lyra took her own seat, representing not just her own pack but all the wolves who had been marginalized under the old system. It wasn't perfect. There were still wolves who resisted, packs that refused to join the council, territories where the old ways held strong, and the conspiracy's leadership remained elusive, continuing to operate from the shadows. But it was a beginning, a foundation to build on. As the gathering dispersed and wolves began the journey home, Kale and Lyra stood together on a ridge, watching the sun set over the territories. "Do you think it will work?" Lyra asked, leaning into his warmth. "Everything we've built? I think it has a chance," Kale replied, wrapping his arm around her. "Which is more than we had a year ago. More than I had when you stumbled into my fortress, running from a pack that wanted you dead." He kissed the top of her head. "You changed everything, Lyra. Changed me. Changed how I see the world. Changed what's possible. We changed each other." Lyra turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You taught me that I didn't have to accept other people's definitions of who I was. That I could claim my own power and use it to protect rather than dominate. That love doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. Two wolves who had been broken and alone finding wholeness in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Kyle smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. "Come on, we should head back. We have a council meeting in 3 days, and I want to spend at least one day not thinking about politics or conspiracies." "What did you have in mind?" Lyra asked, though the gleam in her eye suggested she already knew. "Going back to the fortress." Kale's voice was soft, almost wistful. "I haven't been there since we left. I think it's time to reclaim it. Not as a prison, but as a home. Our home, if you want it." Lyra's breath caught. "You mean it? You want to live there again?" "With you, yes." Kale took both her hands. "I think it's time for that place to be filled with life again. With laughter and hope, and maybe, someday, with children who will never know what it means to be called unlucky or cursed." He pulled her close. "Build a life with me, Lyra. Not just fight battles and change the world, but actually live. Wake up together, work together, dream together. Be my mate not just in name, but in every small, domestic, beautiful way that matters." Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she nodded. "Yes. To all of it, yes. Before you go, if this story of transformation and love against all odds touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment telling me what part resonated most with you. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are so many more stories of supernatural romance and found family waiting to be told. Epilogue. 5 years later, the fortress in the Shadow Peak Mountains was unrecognizable. The courtyards bloomed with carefully tended gardens where children played and learned. The halls that had echoed with loneliness now rang with voices and laughter. The library Kale had maintained alone for decades was now a center of learning, where scholars from every pack came to study the old texts and share new knowledge. And in the highest tower, Lyra and Kale's personal quarters looked out over the territories they had helped transform. Lyra stood at the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their first child grew. 5 years of hard work, of council meetings and conspiracy hunting, of building alliances and changing minds, and they had achieved something remarkable. Not perfection, never that, but progress. Real, measurable, sustained progress toward a more just society. Kale came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Thinking deep thoughts? Thinking about how far we've come?" Lyra leaned back against him, comfortable and content. About Morgan and what he said, about the conspiracy wanting to create perfect order, and how what we built instead is beautifully messy and complicated and human or wolf or whatever. But it's ours, freely chosen, and that makes all the difference. "We still haven't found their leadership," Kale reminded her gently. "The conspiracy's head still hides, planning their next move." "I know." Lyra turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. "But we have something they don't. We have hope and community and the knowledge that change is possible because we've already done it. When they make their next move, we'll be ready." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "Besides, we have something else they'll never understand. We have love, real and earned and worth fighting for." Kyle kissed her, deep and slow, a promise renewed every day for 5 years and counting. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My mate." my partner, my salvation. I love you too. Lyra pulled him closer, feeling their child kick between them. My mate, my teacher, my home. Outside, the sun finished setting, and the stars began to emerge. In the fortress below, someone started playing music, and voices joined in song, a celebration of simply being alive, being together, being free. Lyra and Kale stood in their tower, holding each other as night fell over the mountains. Two wolves who had found each other in darkness and built a future in light, proof that even the deepest curses could be broken and the loneliest souls could find their way home. The end of this chapter, but just the beginning of their story. Because love that transforms the world never truly ends. It just keeps growing, keeps spreading, keeps proving that hope is stronger than any curse, and connection is more powerful than any conspiracy. Thank you for joining me on Lyra and Kale's journey, and I hope their story reminded you that sometimes the people who are called cursed are actually the ones destined to break all the wrong things and build something beautiful from the ruins.